Hello everyone. So here we are at MyDrash and trying a new recording approach, so I hope this one does better than the other ones. Our parasha is Parashat Nitzavim, and we are also very much at the eve of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. So we're going to talk about the first Midrash, Tanchuma, in the parasha, but we're going to connect it very much to Rosh Hashanah as well. And I'd also like to tell you that you may find a lot of connection between the kinds of stuff that I say today and the kinds of things that we talked about last week. But hopefully, as usual, whenever you address a new topic, or the same topic, then each time you spin it, the different angle comes out slightly different. So hopefully this won't bore you if you listened to last week. So parasha we're in at is Parashat Nitzavim, and Parashat Nitzavim, which appears in Sefer Dvarim, chapter 29, Kaftet, Perek Kaftet, Pasuk Tet, verse 9, begins the following way. This is all part of Moshe giving a long speech to the people of Israel, warning them about what's to come, instructing them, guiding them, sort of in his last, in the last few times that he has before the end of the 5 books of the Torah and Moshe's death. And so he says to them, Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem lifnei Hashem Elohechem. You are all standing here before God. Ashechem, Shivtechem, Ziknechem, Veshotrechem, Kol Ish Yisrael. All of you, from your heads, your leaders, your elders, your Shotrechem, your those that keep the law. Kol Ish Yisrael, all the people of Israel. Tapchem, Neshechem, your children, your wives. V'gilcha asher b'kir machanecha. The ger, yes, the convert. Everybody is here. Le'ovrecha mivrit Hashem Elohecha uve'alato asher Adonai Elohecha koret imcha hayom. To basically pass you through into the covenant that God is going to be setting today with you. And this goes on, and God constantly is through Moshe is telling the people of Israel how they are they have to follow God's word, and otherwise they'll be punished. And they know all their history, all that they passed, all the things that they had done, that happened in Egypt, and all the bad things that they could do if they follow false idols, etc., etc. This is the gist of what happens at the beginning of the parsha. Now, many of the commentators have commentated, as commentators do, on the beginning of the parsha. The word Atem nitzavim hayom kulchem. You are all standing here today. And then this list. What does that signify? Atem, you, nitzavim hayom, are standing here, kulchem. Yes, all of you. What does that kulchem mean? What does it mean that we're standing? What is the significance of this standing? Okay, because what do we make of that? And so the Midrash, Tanchuma, the beginning of the parasha, does something similar. It too tries to understand what is the significance of saying you are all here today. So then what does it say? It connects it to a verse in Mishlei. In Proverbs, chapter 12, verse 7. זה שאמר כתוב, הפוך רשעים ואינם, ובית צדיקים יעמוד. If you turn over evildoers, they are gone, but the house of the righteous shall stand. Okay, it's the verse that says basically, it's once you overturn the evil, they disappear, but the righteous somehow have, are able to survive, and through this, through some trials. כל זמן שהקדוש ברוך הוא מסתכל במעשיהם של רשעים ומהפך בהם, as long as any time that God looks at the deeds of the evildoers and מהפך בהם, and מהפך means to turn over. Okay, so it turns it over, looks at it, tries to rehash it, אין להם תקומה. They have no ability to redeem themselves. And then they give a list. Now in the flood, there were evildoers before the flood, the great flood, and they all died, and they weren't able to recover. And the same thing happened with Sodom, with Sodom and Gomorrah. And the same happened later on with Babylon. And basically every one of these events, once God decided to actually sort of punish them for all the evil that they had done, there was no recovery. Aval Yisrael noflin ve'omdim. But Israel, people of Israel, fall and rise up. וכן הוא אומר, אל תשמחי אויבתי לי, כי נפלתי, קמתי וגומר. So it's quoting a verse from Micha that says, don't, you, my enemy, referring to the enemies around Israel, don't be so happy that you see me fall, for I shall rise up again. And a few other verses that say the same thing. Fine. So here we see a general statement. People of Israel are really great. Every time that they fall down, they rise up. And you might think, that this is sort of what the MyDrash is saying, is that, all of you stand here today, it's saying basically, calm down, you're all standing here, everything is fine, I will always take care of you, says God. Yeah? But the MyDrash then takes an interesting turn. Amar Rabbi Chanina bar Papa, Amar Kadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Chanina bar Papa says, this is what God is saying in this verse. It talks about how you fall and you rise up. Ne'olam lo hiketi uma v'shaniti la. I have never had to strike down a people more than once. Aval atem bnei Yaakov lo chlitem. But you, the children of Jacob, you wouldn't perish. Shneimar, and here it quotes a verse from the end of Dvarim, which is in chapter 30. You can see this chapter, Perek Lamed, Pasuk of Gimel, verse 23. Well, that doesn't make any sense. There is no verse 23 in chapter 30. So the quote over here is obviously incorrect. But I would guess that this is referring to, to chapter 32, verse 23, which is the famous Shirat Azinu, the end, which is near like this song or poetry that Moshe says to the people of Israel at the end of Dvarim, and he says there, "Chitzai achale bam," my arrows I shall shower into them. But the word achale, which means to lechalot, to get rid of, like to finish up. Okay, lechalot something means that it will perish. So when God says chitzai achale bam, the pshat, the simple explanation of the verse is, I will pour in all my arrows into them and punish them very much. But the MyDrash here twists it a bit differently. It's saying, what does that mean? It means that you're going to pour all of your arrows into them, and you'll be finished with your arrows, and they will still be standing. Chitzai kalin vehen einam kalim. My arrows will finish before they are done for, before they are completely destroyed. The people of Israel, that is. V'kach Allah Knesset Yisrael. And we know that in Eicha we say Darach Kashto v'Yetziveni Kamatara Lachetz. That the people of Israel are talking about how God has made them like a target for shooting practice. Okay, that He is shooting at them, harming them, punishing them all the time. Mashal lema davar domeh legibor she'emid et hakora haya zorek bo et hachitzim chitzav kalin ve'hakora b'mkoma omedet. It's saying basically it's just like a target, okay, where you shoot at the target, you shoot at the dartboard, and at the end of the game, all the darts are in the dartboard, but the dartboard is still standing. So the people of Israel survive when God attacks them. Af Yisrael, kol zman she'Yisraelim ba'im aleim, as long as the God's torments come upon them, ha'Yisraelim kalim ve'em kuman omdim ve'inam kalim, they keep on standing. So this seems to put a bit of a different spin, which gets reinforced later on in the MyDrash, that says that the people of Israel are special in that they don't seem to give up or to be destroyed by God's terrible attacks against them. And God is saying, in wonder almost, all the other nations, when I have struck them down, they've never been able to recover. And you rise and rise up again. Okay? And that's like this, and that's what it means, Atem Nitzavim hayom kulchem. You're all standing here today, but you're all standing meaning you will forever stand. You're still here, right? In fact, this idea that God has struck you down, you rised up again, has already happened at least twice. I mean, many times, but in the most strongest fashion, twice, in the sin of the golden calf, the sin of the spies, and in other cases too, where the people of Israel were punished, and they rose up, right? They came back. Here we are, 40 years later. They're ready to go into the land of Israel. So, but it's described here as if there's some guy shooting arrows, trying to destroy, and God is amazed. Look, I've tried to destroy these people, and they keep on coming back. So what is all this about? So the second part of the Midrash, which I'm going to sort of summarize as we go along now, says the same idea, but with a bit of a different angle, and through that we can understand what's being said. I'm just going to get up for 1 second to check the time so that we don't go too long. 1 second. Okay. So the Midrash then repeats almost the same idea. Amar Chizkiah b'no shel Rabchia. Chizkiah, the son of Rabchia, said, Lama nismecha parasha zo leparashot klalot. Right after this whole story, right before this whole thing with Nitzavim, we have the end of Kitavo, which is full of curses, full of punishments that will come upon the people of Israel when they defy God. So why does this come immediately after? So they heard all these terrible things are going to happen to them, and they became scared. How are we going to survive if God punishes us in such a terrible way? And Moshe calls to them and says to them, haven't there been, so many times that, that I've told you, like this is what's happening in Nitzavim. He's saying to them, all those terrible things that you did in the past and God punished you, and look, you're still here. Meaning, yes, it sounds terrible. Yes, all these terrible curses are going to happen, but you're still here. Yeah, this is especially important because in Kitavo, if you look at it, the ending, which is a bit before Nitzavim, if you look at chapter 28, verse 68, okay, so you'll see that this is a very special set of curses, which I won't go into right now, but it doesn't end with God redeeming the people of Israel when they make tshuva. It ends with them going back to Egypt, meaning being sent back to Egypt, in a sense reversing history. Yes, like as if they never left Egypt, they're still their slaves, and so it may be very depressing. Look, we have no way to rise up, right? And so Moshe is telling them, don't worry, you're all standing here today. You've survived, God's punishments before, and you can rise up again. But then they ask, but why is it that we rise up? How do you know, Moshe? The people ask him that we will be able to rise up. Look, all these other nations, when God punished them, they haven't been able to recover. So what do you say about that? So Moshe answers them and says, when these evildoers suffer, מבעטים בהם ואינם מזכירים שמו של הקדוש ברוך הוא, שנאמר שפוך עמדך לגויים אשר לא ידעוך ועל ממלכות אשר בשמך לא קראו. When the Gentiles suffer, they curse God. They actually don't even, and sometimes don't even mention God. They shrug him off and they just move on. אבל ישראל, כשהייסורים באים עליהם, הם נכנעים ומתפללים בפניו. But the people of Israel, when they get punished, they remember their Father in the heavens, and they pray to Him. And that's where they will be redeemed. So God says to them, "Afal pi she'aklalot haelu ba'ot alechem, hen ma'amidot etchem." Even though these curses come upon you, they also are the ones that help you stand back up. וכן הוא אומר, למען ענותך ולמען עשותך. And so Moshe tells them, even though you suffer, you still have a standing. You still have, your legs are still planted heavily, strongly on the ground. You will not falter indefinitely. Eventually you'll be able to recover. This is fascinating. It's fascinating because on several levels. First of all, there's this thing, as I said, that describes God trying to push you down and us always bouncing back up. Just like that toy you give kids where it's like heavy on the bottom and you can try to push it down, and no matter how many times you do, you keep on rising back up. And that's a very interesting image, right, of God in a sense trying to hammer us down, and we insisting, that we will not be overcome by God. And of course that's very strange. What does that mean? God can destroy us if he wants to, right? So what does that mean? It's that God is, obviously, that's one question. And the other thing is that there's this idea of how, we always reread the book of Judges, for example, and the book of Judges starts with this description of how people of Israel sin, God punishes them, and then they remember God and they call him back, and then God says, okay, fine, I'll come and save you. And when you read it like that, and you think about all of our history, you say, oh, we're always, these, ridiculous, dishonest, lot. When things are good, we forget God, and then when God punishes us, we remember him. That's really not honest. But here the Midrash is saying, no, but that's what's so special about you, the Midrash says, because it reminds us that there's also another option. There's another alternative. We could also do something different as a people when God torments us. We could give up. We could say, fine, so God left us, and we're not ever going to look at him again. We just let's just move on. It's not relevant anymore. We can just forget about it. And yet, no, we come back. We say, oh, we're sorry. We really ask forgiveness. And so the Midrash is saying, that's actually a really great thing. That's what means you'll always survive. That's what will bring you past all the trials and tribulations that you're going to have. So that's also a very interesting spin of it. And I think that what the Midrash is trying to say really is that we do have a choice as a people, and we can return, or we can decide to move on. And in the end, what's so amazing and what gives the people of Israel the right to survive, even though God supposedly tries to push us down, is this tenacious defiance against God, not defiance against God's commands, but defiance against God, attempt to push us away. I think if you look at it in the context, I want to look at it in two contexts. One is the Holocaust. I think that if any, we as our generation can definitely be completely amazed, what's happened. We were 1/3 of our people worldwide was completely destroyed and annihilated. All communities and cultures were wiped out practically. Less than 100 years ago, and here we are with a state that happened only 3 years after that terrible calamity was over, and with a state, building ourselves up, and which is so amazing, right, to see that occur, and at the same time, but putting aside the physical, the material revival, even more important is the spiritual revival. Can you believe that God would do that to us? That God would allow the people of Israel to all be to be a plan to wipe us all out, left and right, old people, young people, with no discretion, and that we would still believe, that we would emerge out of that, and there would still be people willing to believe in God and say, we defy your attempt to push us away. We will not let you push us away. We demand to be in your audience. We demand to be your people, despite what you did to us just 60 years ago, or just X years ago, depending on each generation. It's really quite amazing. It's one of the biggest questions that we have, but we've been able to believe despite that terrible calamity. And God says, something? That is where your strength is. Not because I can't destroy you physically, I could do that, but I can't seem to destroy your will. Right? People have free will in this world, and God is saying, you seem to consistently choose as a people. Maybe not all the people, but there's always a large enough chunk that says, despite what you've done to us, Hashem, we demand your love and your guidance and your presence in our lives. And that is why you'll always survive. That is almost as if He is trying to push us away and say, I've tried killing you, I've tried pushing you away, you won't give up. It's in a sense, up to us. How do we interpret it? How do we interpret those things that God puts us through? Of course we know on a theological level that maybe this is punishment for something that we did wrong, but it doesn't really matter, right? But it's the difference between a person interpreting it just like somebody in a couple can resent and just walk away from from a abusive spouse, versus somebody interpreting it as a father trying to educate you, right? Maybe the same slaps on your wrist, or the same, suffering, the physical suffering. The question is, how do you interpret and how do you process it emotionally, right? And you should interpret things differently if it's an abusive parent or if it's an educating parent, right? Those two things might sometimes even look similar, but they're worlds apart in reality. And the decision of how to interpret those things is up to us. We're the ones who do it, and so we're the ones who, by our unwillingness to give up on our relationship with God, we're basically saving ourselves. That's why we survive. So I'll just end up by connecting this to Rosh Hashanah, but I think that the connection is obvious. Here we are coming to Rosh Hashanah, and in Rosh Hashanah we're doing two things which are inseparable, and I think that I've always found it to be extremely beautiful what they mean. Because on the one hand we're coming and we're accepting God as our Lord, as our King, and that's wonderful. But at the same exact time it comes with a price, right? Because it's also the day of judgment. It's also the day when we are judged for life or death, right? Yom Kippur is the day where we ask forgiveness. But Rosh Hashanah is the day of judgment. It's the day when we get judged, and we will pay the price of that judgment. We will actually have to bear, the verdict that is given. And sure, 10 days later we'll ask forgiveness, and maybe God will be willing to forgive us. But on Rosh Hashanah is when we get judged. That judgment is part and parcel of accepting God as our King. Only the King can judge you, right? If he's not your King, why would he judge you? Why do you owe him anything? We're walking into the courtroom. We're not being dragged there. We're going in and saying, God, we demand audience with you, even though we know there may be a price that we pay. And so here too, there is, that's what's so beautiful about Rosh Hashanah. That's what's so amazing about it. That's why we talk about Abraham and Yitzchak and the Akedah, right? And then the binding of Yitzchak. Abraham walked with his eyes open, knowing that he was going to pay a price for his devotion to God. Not going into the questions about what was going on there. It's a very difficult story, much more difficult than what happens in Rosh Hashanah. But the essence is the same. We're coming and saying to God, you know what? We accept your kingship over us, your leadership, your ownership of us, knowing that it's going to cost us, accepting that it might cost us, and yet we demand it anyway. And so that is what's happening in Rosh Hashanah, and that's what all of our prayers are there. And we're coming and we're praising God with a smile on our face, knowing that it may cost us, because we demand, despite it all, without our relationship with Him, we feel that we are nothing, or that we can't have a meaningful life. And that's what's happening in Rosh Hashanah, and that's why we shall always stand, because, throughout history, throughout thousands of years, people of Israel eventually, it may have taken them time, but eventually always made the choice to stick by, by that, covenant that Abraham so many years ago had started, and kept to that pledge, and kept on with the relationship. So with that, Shabbat Shalom, and Shana Tova.